Leading the shift, modern marketing in a legacy industry is going to be quite impressive. Gregory's going to be joined by Devin Kerr, AVP of Marketing at NASDAQ, and I'm going to invite him up to the stage just to get warm. I know everyone's moving around, but Gregory, this is going to be a great session, and I figured let's get the ball rolling, let the crowd settle down. So head on up here, and let's get started.
Thank you.
Calm down a little bit.
Yeah. All right. All right, you guys ready? Who's ready? Everyone awake?
Hungry.
Hungry. Absolutely hungry. All, thank you for being here for our session today. I just want to let everyone know that the way I am going to run this fireside chat, it's not a presentation. It's going to be more like you're witnessing a live podcast, essentially. There were no questions in advance. Just really the brief little write-up that you may have seen on the website or on the agenda. But other than that, we're going to kind of guide by those themes, take it real time. If anyone has any questions, obviously along the way, feel free to talk about it. We're going to go into really, how does a legacy brand, NASDAQ, you guys have been around 1971? 1971. How do you take a brand and how do you continually innovate? How do you continually bring it to the next level? My name is Gregory Yates. I'm going to moderate it, but really just going to have a conversation. I've been in the business world 30 years, spent the last 15 of it within asset management. I've been a CMO across all different sides of the business, from media, agency, brand, and service provider. So I have really this purview of kind of seeing all these different combinations from all different sorts of organizations, from startup all the way up to enterprise level. Today, I have with me Devin Kerr, who is over at NASDAQ. She is the global head of workflow and insights, which sounds to me quite big, and probably not what you necessarily think of when you think of NASDAQ, because people think of NASDAQ, obviously, of their listing business, right? But NASDAQ, in theory, is a tech company that also happens to be one of the largest exchanges out there. So, Devin, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I would love for you just to kind of give everyone your background, what you do over at NASDAQ, and then we'll really kind of kick it off.
Sure, happy to. Well, thank you all for having me. Excited to be here. So as Greg suggested, my name is Devin Kerr, and I lead the marketing function for Workflow and Insights, which is effectively a quarter of half of the organization. NASDAQ has two divisions, and one is really focused on connecting capital to opportunity. That's our Capital Access Platforms division. The secondary one is really our Financial Technology division. So each of those have a myriad of solutions, technology, advisory services. So I think the one thing that you gestured towards is NASDAQ isn't just an exchange. And we've been really focused on the marketing side of evolving our brand towards kind of a institutional exchange-based financial company into really a technology company. Before NASDAQ, I've always been in B2B marketing, so I really honed my chops in digital marketing in the manufacturing industry, oddly enough. Yep. So talk about legacy,
yes.
Right? Talk about traditional. And I think that actually set up a really great kind of backdrop for me to operate in, really kind of navigating a bit of uncertainty, really having to drive change within organizations, right? Especially looking ahead and future casting what trends are going to happen and how do we effectively anticipate things. So, I love the company I work for. I'm super pumped to be able to work for such an incredible brand that in and of itself stands for innovation. And it's been a really unique experience. So looking forward to today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. I do have a question for everyone here. There was a session that took place right before this. There was the two sessions. Joy was one of them, leading with joy. This might sound like an obscure question, and maybe I may not ask it correctly, but when you think of joy, what technically is joy? I'm going into neuroscience right now. Joy is a primary emotion, right? So as we move into 2026, there's lots of activity taking place across marketing. There's the conversation of moving from an attention economy to an emotion economy, right? Where it's all kind of really understanding brand and that connection, and then bringing someone in and establishing an emotional connection so they feel more attached to your brand, which inherently then also creates trust. There's also the notion of innovation, right? So everyone's looking to innovate. Companies are always looking to innovate, and our conversation today is also about innovation. But what is innovation, right? If we look at essentially the definition of innovate, it's to take something that already exists, and then how do you apply potentially a new method, a new idea, or a new product to it, right? It could be revamping a process. It's not necessarily applying AI. It's not, oh, we have to think of this new technology. It's not all these other different pieces. Then you also have, when you think of a company and you're trying to inflict change, how do you actually do that? Because not only do you have these ideas, but you also have an internal culture, especially if that company's been around for a while and they're stuck on what they've been doing because it's always the way we've done it mentality. Fortunately, I think with NASDAQ, is because it is a tech forward-thinking company, you guys do make acquisitions, and you are thinking about the future, and you're privy for insights for organizations that are listing. I'm hoping that NASDAQ, in theory, might be a little bit of a better organization or easier organization to potentially pivot or continue to adapt. But still coming from a marketing side, right? When you're looking at the marketing side, how great of a seat does the marketing team have at that table to create change? And with your role, you're essentially managing this on a global scale. So on a global scale, it's not just, hey, we have this brand, it's whoa, that works for North America. We have all the nuances in all of the other territories across the world that have their own like literally nuances in the way that they want to be communicated with, right? And it's cultural. So from your role and what you're seeing from a global perspective with a technology brand, how are you in your role, as well as the marketing team, how are you creating or imposing, we'll say, change across the organization so the company continues to be on a path of innovation so it can essentially reinvent itself to make sure it's always poised for the future?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that, we're continuing to navigate, frankly. And the thing that we keep talking about, it's twofold. It's one, how do we build communities, right? Both within our existing customer base, but also externally within the broader market. And the second thing is, how do we be super authentic, right? And I think authenticity is where you'll stand out not only as a brand, but in those micro interactions that you have with your customers, with colleagues, right? Across the board. And so, thinking about both of those things, we need to be super purposeful when it comes down to where are we placing our bets, where are we making our investments, and how is our kind of product roadmap mapping to kind of the TAM SAM, right? And some of the opportunities that we see within each of these markets. And I think, the easy runaway train to get to, especially within a corporate environment, is, wanting to take a one-size-fits-all approach, A, in order to scale and be more efficient, but also two is to maybe not put as much emphasis on the data and using that to drive decision making. And so taking a more wide scale, broad approach where, revenue teams oftentimes, right, they get super excited.
Sure.
They see a glimmer of hope and they want to double down, and that's the next best thing. And so we've been really purposeful in asking questions from the marketing point of view, and frankly being empowered to ask questions is the other big thing. To really say, okay, well, help walk me through, give me your TAM SAM analysis. What's our right to win in this market? And what are some of the nuances in which we need to customize our approach to allow us to most effectively enter the market? And so, as opposed to saying each year, we're going through 2026 planning, as I'm sure many of you are, really looking across, and as opposed to saying we're going to enter or we're going to focus on 16 different local markets in different countries and have to customize our landing pages, have to customize all of our content, make sizable investments in all of that, irrespective of AI. Yeah. Right? Because we like to talk about translation versus transliteration. But instead having, picking our 4 big bets that are new bets, really working in partnership with our product, our revenue, and our marketing team in order to set KPIs and using that to advance change. So that's at the business level. At the enterprise level, all of the marketing leaders for our various functions are also coalescing around how do we take those individual business-centric approaches and ladder them up into NASDAQ's enterprise narrative. And so it really is a bi-directional communication path right?
Sure.
Where we need to provide bottoms up, the individual product lines and their corporate strategies. But it also has to reflect and align into the bigger NASDAQ enterprise view as well.
So based off of that, I picked up a few things. Obviously, being a brand, being authentic, and so there's conversations that I've been really having with different brands that are out there. What they're challenged with is how do we sometimes get performance out of something while trying to be authentic, because they may not go hand in hand, right? At sometimes, but then also. One thing that sort of stood out is NASDAQ sort of being basically like, we'll call it a tech company, a data company, don't necessarily use all the data. So I thought that was kind of like an interesting point. But really, as we were talking about kind of the global markets, building these communities, it's not just NASDAQ, you have eVestment. And I'm not sure if everyone in the room necessarily knows eVestment or has used its product really in depth. If you could explain really what that is to everyone. But now you have product lines, like take Apple. Apple's very easy. Apple Music, Apple TV, it's led with Apple. How does NASDAQ, one, kind of lead? Because is it NASDAQ eVestment, right? So what is that hierarchy, and how do you really bring that out to those communities?
Yeah, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, right, as an organization, because NASDAQ in and of itself, we have inorganic growth levers and organic growth levers. And at the end of the day, you have to figure out a way in which to blend both of them. And so our brand strategy is very much focused on descriptive branding, as opposed to leading with what we would call or classify as sub-brands. And so in the hierarchy of NASDAQ, right, we have the NASDAQ brand. That is our anchor, right? That is our pride. We protect it. It is valuable, right? We go through brand valuation studies. And we have a qualitative and a quantitative measure of which and how we define that brand value.
Yes.
Outside of all of that, right, so you mentioned NASDAQ eVestment. Super powerful tool. It was an acquisition that we made, I believe, in 2017. And it is an absolutely amazing platform that is really underpinning, our value prop for this division and half of NASDAQ, which is how we connect capital to opportunity.
Yes.
And so it creates a platform and an ecosystem with which asset managers, asset owners, consultants can really go and identify opportunities, figure out who should they match with, who should be kind of their next best person or their next best firm in which to invest their assets. And then likewise on the flip side, for asset managers to go and promote themselves, right? So it truly also is a marketing platform for asset managers with which to ensure that they are best positioned in order to get that next business.
And the marketing organization, how is it really set up within NASDAQ? Because coming back to the brand overall, and from a corporate perspective, because NASDAQ means something to individual retail investors. It also means something to the wealth management industry, whether you're an RIA, a multifamily office, but then also the institutional side, which could be single-family offices, endowments, foundations, pensions. And their buying cycles are completely different, and the value proposition for each of those is completely different. So as NASDAQ continues to evolve its brand or its narrative, its communication with these individuals, and these individuals also, their emotional states are completely different, and they consume media differently, but sometimes at the same time, and maybe on some of their social channels, we'll just say, but they have different needs. So as the brand continues to evolve, how do you take all of that into consideration and be everything to everyone, when at the same time that concept of everything to everyone means you're nothing to no one, right? So how do you manage that? How's the brand manage that as it continues to evolve?
Yeah, and I think the way in which we're approaching it, right, and we're early days in having to grapple with this, again, many firms are, but it's coming back to that core tenet of community. Right? And both figuring out, what's the matrix with which we want to attack this? You can segment your audiences in a way that is, segment or persona based. You can also segment it based on product line, right? There's region is another additional application to that. And then, further, when we think about the firmographic and the demographic splits, some things we've recently been discussing are, do CEOs or CFOs or CMOs of very particular segments want to congregate together? And if so, what is our unique value that we can deliver to that outside of just being a convener? It is kind of what is our voice in this narrative and how do we capitalize on that opportunity? Alternatively, we don't always have to have a voice, right? And our magic and our power is really bringing disparate audiences together to have and create dialogue.
Sure.
So we recently did that as part of one of our events that we hosted in New York City, where we brought together a panel, right, of asset owners and allocators and consultants as well as asset managers, which frankly, sometimes don't always want to be in the same rooms with one another. And so being able to kind of pull out and rip out, a conversation that's one, authentic, right? Two, value add to all parts of the audience and community that we're wanting to speak to is super powerful. But you have to be thoughtful about it, and you also have to be willing to have trade-offs as to you're not necessarily going to want to have massive multi-100-person events. Really, the power and the magic of some things and engagements can really be in a 15-person roundtable or a small, intimate networking event. And so that's some of the transformation we've been driving with our business partners. Is there's oftentimes more value in kind of more curated experiences that are smaller because you actually get some of that more authentic connection.
So, which brings me back to my question about how the marketing team is structured. And you had mentioned that there's great communication flow back and forth, but the method of marketing to these audience segments is, we'll call it, there's a level, they're bespoke because they're small communities. So, how do you scale? So, what is NASDAQ doing, one, to maybe improve communications internally, improve its ability to create material, like marketing, messaging materials, like that supply chain? What are you guys doing from a technology standpoint? Because I'd like to kind of delve into there, because we, of course, have to go into AI and how stacks are set up or communication flows are set up. What is the structure of marketing, like the different divisions within NASDAQ? And then how is the communication flow set up? And then what are you doing from a technological infrastructure to take these bespoke, curated events, but also scale them globally? That's hard to do.
Yeah, it's very hard, very challenging. And I think the kind of really cool thing about what we do is we make things look easy oftentimes if we're doing it really well. All that to say, so NASDAQ has a decentralized marketing structure. So we have an enterprise marketing organization, which is led by our chief marketing officer, who reports into the chief strategy officer, which, to your first question, right, is really how we can continue to drive that emphasis on the strategic vision for the organization at large. And then we had, so really that's where our brand team sits, shared creative services, as well as our enterprise kind of digital and systems team. And then we have divisional marketing teams, which are really focused and split by the division with which they support, right? So we have capital access platforms, we have financial technology, as the two main tenants of the organization. And so each of those have their own marketing infrastructure. And so, again, you have to be really purposeful with how you engage with your marketing colleagues, because day to day, it's really easy to kind of get into your myopic view of the world.
Of course, yeah.
But we often say, right? I say to my team, I say to myself, we all talk to each other about this, which is pick your head up. Is kind of one of our taglines.
Sure, pick your head up. That's a takeaway. So no matter what, pick your head up and just get it done.
Get it done, but also look across and draw connections, right? And where our unique value within the organization, and oftentimes people look to us for, is to kind of be that sense of connectivity across the firm. And I say that because, we partner closely with our product teams, we partner closely with our revenue teams, we partner closely with the marketers, we partner closely with our revenue operations organizations. So we ourselves as marketers sit on really interesting data points and data sets, but also we are kind of a purveyor of conversation. And so where we can connect those dots, right? That's another big tagline at NASDAQ is connect the dots. Like that's really where our value can be for the firm.
Well, I think that phrase, connect the dots, I think resonates across all different kind of functions within an organization, right? One of the biggest challenges that I've seen really is communication internally. And when talking about AI, I was having a prompt conversation with someone one day, and I said, where I think where maybe AI and prompting AI could actually help is human communication, because you have to prompt a GPT a certain way in order to get the output that you need, which then helps you learn how to be clearer in your questioning process, right? In your querying process, which could actually help internal organizations. At Goldcast, we recently ran some research, first of its kind. It's emotion-based research of what the C-suite thinks of marketing and what their sentiment is, on top of how are they performing, but then also where should marketing be investing? And then we were kind of building out a roadmap about how marketing could be successful moving into 2026. And we found the data to be really quite interesting. And it's not like this across all organizations. But what we uncovered is that the C-suite, CFOs, CIOs, chief information officers, and CEOs do not necessarily trust or have faith in their current marketing organizations for the reason that marketing at times may think, oh, we have a seat at the table, or we understand the customer, the voice of the customer. Will just say the C-suite doesn't necessarily believe that the marketing team truly knows what the customer actually wants. And if they don't know what the customer actually wants, then how do they go and build an internal infrastructure in order to solve for that? At NASDAQ, you mentioned that you're connected really right into the Chief Strategy Officer, which is a great position to be in, but there's still a few other C-suite individuals that also need to be communicated with, especially when it comes to procuring budget to do what needs to be done, right? And different alliances that are made. What are you doing at NASDAQ, or what is the team doing at NASDAQ to really foster those relationships and to make sure there isn't a disconnect between what the marketing team thinks the C-suite thinks of them versus what the C-suite actually does think of them? How do you guys mitigate that risk, and how do you forge those relationships to get the budget and or infrastructure that you need?
Well, I think it comes back to, first of all, your first point, which is communication, right? I think, if in the absence of communication, people create their own narratives, which can be very dangerous. But then the second part of that is kind of follow up and follow through and sharing of information, which is an addendum to how we communicate.
Yep.
So you're asking about systems and technology and infrastructure. And so, one, the expectation of my team, and they've done an incredible job about doing this, as a product marketing function, right? We market products and solutions, but we're also responsible for cultivating that community and understanding our buyers, and also future casting what's going to happen next. And so I'm a big believer that kind of marketing is a leading indicator of future success, right? And so we really need to lean in. What data points do we have that I can continue to bring up on our forecasting calls that are unique to marketing and showcase our value? So, if we see an increase in MQLs, we have a model in which we can extrapolate out future impact 6 months, 9 months down the road based on our average sales cycles for each of our products. We can talk about that, right? And again, kind of future cast what we expect to happen. We also really are thinking about voice of customer in a very real sense. So we have sales technologies and a sales tech stack, which records conversations. It has an AI overlay, which allows us to aggregate and extract out insights based on, competitor mentions, based on, solutions, features, plus minuses, right? What do they like? What do they don't like? And we're actually plowing that insight into how we're evolving our messaging, right? And how are we kind of forcing ourselves to have conversations about, is what we assume to be the features that are going to resonate most actually what people care about? And then outside of that, we're also engaging with outside third parties, which is maybe the third kind of tenet of some of the things that we try to do to gather and get confidence, right, from our outside leadership or internal leadership, is also bringing in outside voices, right? So whether it be having a really solid review strategy for our software solutions where we can actually point to third-party voice of customer, right, that's being collected, as well as working with consulting agencies, right, to help us do and evaluate like brand studies, speak to our customers in kind of, unique environments that were not necessarily part of the conversation. So institutionalizing a lot of that knowledge and plowing it through. And then the other thing, just with respect to transparency and communication, the marketing forecasting and budget management process, to your point about securing budget, that really comes down to how deeply are you ingrained with your finance partners. Super important.
And not only like ingrained, but also speaking the same language, right?
Totally.
And so one of the challenges that we also found in the study, but this is something that has been there for years, and while I've been brought into CMO positions, my thought process was, okay, marketing's not here just to be kind of this creative solution that makes things look pretty. We're here as a growth-driving engine. And unfortunately, that at times took managing the culture internally to change that perception of, no, we're building out models where if we invest into marketing initiatives, we should generate X towards the business. But what I found, which comes back to a couple things that you were just saying, one is third-party validation on your thoughts, and then number two, people sort of internally having kind of their ideas or their own internal data. So what I have always disliked when being in a marketing position, a couple things. One is, I don't know what it's like at NASDAQ, it's technology, so they might think about things a little differently, but versus older, more stodgy organizations, where marketing's just full of jargon, no one understands what marketing is, but they all think they're marketers, and they don't need to know exactly what our day-to-day is, but we need to know exactly what it is that they do, or else we're discredited. And then everyone has their opinion oh, well, this is what our clients want. Really? Well, how many of them you spoken with? Well, 2? Okay, you're telling me that that's statistically accurate when we have data. This is what I think our clients need. And by the way, we have these third-party validators. And that's what, it's not even the data that we've collected, it's the third-party validation, which then brings the conversation sales marketing alignment, because that's really what drives a business, is sales marketing alignment. And some companies, they've come together quite well. Others, it's still disjointed for, we'll call it, different reasons. What is NASDAQ doing from an innovative perspective to really build, bolster, improve, or how does the company function, and how do you work with sales to really truly drive the business, almost as you're just one team, almost with a couple different divisions, like a band. You know, a band has different components to generate a particular sound: drums, bass, guitar, vocals. You need it all essentially to have a complete sound. It's the same thing what marketing and sales should be. How is NASDAQ approaching that and innovating that approach moving forward?
Yeah, it's just such a great question. So, I mean, technology is, of course, one opportunity and tool with which we use in order to, coalesce around shared ideas. And so when we think about, an ABM platform and tool, right? And then really making sure like we're talking the same language when it comes down to the accounts that we should be targeting, and understanding the intent signals and really orchestrating our activities across marketing and sales to be a cohesive experience, right? Because I think we all know, the buyer cycle and the buyer life cycle, right, more broadly, as well as the customer life cycle, can get super fractured when you have BDRs, saying one thing, your website saying a different thing, reps and demos saying a third thing, right? And so really challenging ourselves to sing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, right? We talk a lot about that in our forecasting calls and our revenue alignment calls. The other thing, I think, from marketing, there can be no ego with who you talk to, right? And so to me, hierarchy kind of goes out the window in my day-to-day. I will reach out to a BDR or a BDR manager. I'll also reach out to our head of revenue, right, in the same day to talk about very similar things. But I want to make sure I'm getting the real-time feedback from the front lines, right, from those who are having those conversations, but also validating them with our senior leadership, because they have the 30,000-foot view of the direction of the business. And frankly, right, like very naturally, and this happens within marketing too, sometimes they are at odds, right, with one another. And so what makes my job fun, right, is then I have to figure out, okay, well, how do we reconcile these differences in perspective, and how do we balance the short-term opportunities that we need to hit, or we need to capitalize on in order to hit our targets, right, for the quarter. But then also, how do we balance that with kind of the longer-term ambition and the 3-year roadmap that we've set out for ourselves at the enterprise?
Well, it's interesting, coming back to how I started the conversation with joy, right, that session prior, leading with joy, a primary emotion. And sometimes just having these conversations with the sales team, it's about getting that information, but working together, but then also it creates joy in them because now they're part of the process. And they're more emotionally invested into what's going on, and they're more willing then at that point to actually put a stake in the ground to support your initiative. And now you've built this community that you can go to market with, with your initiatives. I'm going to open it up right now to questions. Does anyone have any questions? There's got to be 1. 2? All right, then I will ask another question then.
How about it?
So if there was a piece of advice that you would have for everyone in this room today, whether it's from our discussion or whether it's about how to communicate internally, how to build better processes, a better system, what's one takeaway that from your experience, especially with this global purview of what's going on at an organization that hits multiple different audiences, multiple different products, what is a takeaway, or even top 3 takeaways that everyone could leave with today that they could implement at their own businesses and become basically a rock star?
So what I like to say to my team and those that I mentor and connect with is, say yes, but be thoughtful. And really what I mean when I say that is, we all have opportunities that come to us through day to day, and it can be simple things like somebody coming in asking, can you step in and just help out? Yes, right? How can I help? And it might not be you're going to do everything that they need you to do, but building that goodwill and having that social and political capital in an organization is huge. And so say yes to those opportunities, and don't let fear or kind of risk-taking preclude you from getting your voice heard in new conversations and new dialogues. Now, you don't always want to say yes, to, again, like I said, to everything, right? So be thoughtful. You should be asking questions, right? Validate kind of some of the assumptions that you have or the other person has. But by and large, I think, what has served me well in my career is by taking advantage of opportunities, even in times of change, right? And again, change is the only constant. With everything happening across the industry, within marketing as a remit, right? Change is going to happen and it's going to continue and it's going to be faster and faster and faster paces of change. And so how we navigate that, right, and how we capitalize on that opportunity by saying yes to things, right? Embracing AI is a good one because if you don't embrace it, probably going to get left behind.
And it's not going away,
Exactly. And so be a first mover, say yes, right? Be a great partner, but advocate for yourself and ask the questions that you need in order to figure out how can you create value.
Well, a quick little anecdote just from one of my daughters who's a Gen Zer. She's a creative. Both of them are creative. One's a graphic designer. One's 15, the other's 17. The other's a filmmaker, aspiring filmmaker. And they're sort of against using AI. And I was reading some research about how that generation is almost like AI averse. But then the problem is they're going to be left behind in this particular case. And so I guess one last thing that I do kind of want to basically chat about is that on a global scale of what you're working on for the brand, what is NASDAQ? What's in front of NASDAQ for the next 3 years? What's the 3 to 5 year strategy? Is there anything that you can disclose, or what maybe those plans are to stay ahead of the game?
So what I'll leave the group with is this. We are at such an exciting time. We're really leaning in, embracing AI and our kind of tech-forward mentality. Our brand tagline is question today, rewrite tomorrow. And so I think there's a lot of really cool things that we have in the docket, and we're going to continue to really lean in there. And so all that to say, we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming that we're all really excited about internally, and look forward to continuing to share more on that as things progress.
Oh, it's fantastic. Devin, thank you for joining me on stage. And everyone, keep track of what's going on in NASDAQ. And obviously, you'll be able to see your efforts along with the broader marketing team's efforts. And thank you again for all the great insights and information.
Of course, thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.